The story begins to this guy. Kurt wasn't what anyone would call a typical useless protagonist. He was far worse. At least, that was the case until he discovered his hidden talents. The story began in a distant village, where an S-ranked wolf monster had launched a devastating attack. In desperation, the villagers pooled their life savings to hire a party of adventurers known as the Flaming Dragon Fang. This group consisted of 3 capable heroes and the seemingly worthless Kurt. The monster, as expected, targeted the weakest. First, it quickly shoved Kurt out of the battlefield, allowing the 3 remaining adventurers to handle the threat without distractions. They successfully subdued the beast and were celebrated as heroes. The party members included Bandana, the skilled ranger, Gulnova, the fiery warrior and team leader, and Marlist, the gentle healer. Following this victory, the trio gained fame as the saviors who had stopped a calamity. However, many began to question why someone like Kurt had been part of such a formidable team in the first place. In truth, Kurt handled the most overlooked job. He did all the household chores for the party. While the others fought monsters, Kurt cooked, cleaned, and took care of the logistics. Whenever the heroes found a meal unsatisfying, they demanded Kurt to cook something better. Yet this time, Bandana informed him that it would be the last meal he'd ever prepare for them. Gulnova had decided to expel Kurt from the party. Their reasoning was harsh. According to them, being a decent cook wasn't enough to justify a spot in their prestigious team, especially when Kurt couldn't even defeat a slime. They also wanted to recruit a mage to grow stronger, but party size restrictions limited them too for members. So, Kurt had to go. Kurt pleaded with Gulnova to reconsider, only to receive a kick to the stomach. The others showed no sympathy. Instead, they laughed at his misfortune, and just like that, Kurt found himself unemployed. Kurt returned to the city in search of work. He visited a facility called Hello Workstation, where he met an eccentric receptionist who took his details and administered an aptitude test to assess his abilities. The ranking scale ranged from SSS to D, but Kurt scored a dismal G across all categories on unprecedented failure. The receptionist, however, encouraged him not to give up. She assured him that there were trade jobs suited for people like him, and suggested trying tests for blacksmithing or alchemy. Unfortunately, the technicians who conducted those exams were currently on break, so Kurt would have to wait a week. Knowing he needed money immediately, the receptionist assigned Kurt to a temporary construction job in a nearby town. Upon arrival, Kurt met a recruiter who was disappointed by how skinny and frail Kurt appeared. Nevertheless, because his team was short-staffed, he reluctantly gave Kurt a simple job mixing mana into cement and repairing the town's boundary wall. Surprisingly, Kurt poured his mana into the work with unexpected effectiveness. When the recruiter returned 3 hours later, he was stunned to find that Kurt had repaired a third of the wall by himself, and without using any equipment. Despite Kurt explaining his method, the recruiter couldn't understand how he had managed it. Impressed, the recruiter offered Kurt a permanent position and even paid him a generous bonus. Encouraged, Kurt gave his best over the next 3 days, and single-handedly completed both the western and northern walls. However, instead of being praised, he was fired. The recruiter explained that the job was meant to provide opportunities to struggling workers, and Kurt's overwhelming efficiency was taking those jobs away. He advised him to look for work in the capital instead and handed him his final payment. Confused and uncertain if this was genuine praise or a polite dismissal, Kurt returned to the workstation, seeking the receptionist's advice. The technicians still hadn't arrived, so he had to wait a few more days. Just then, a woman named Yolisha arrived, urgently looking for someone to help with mining dock. Kurt claimed he had some experience in excavation. Though Yolisha was skeptical of hiring someone who looked so helpless, still, she couldn't afford to hire a burly dwarf. So she reluctantly accepted Kurt's help. After Kurt left with Yolisha, the receptionist noticed something odd. She recalled Kurt effortlessly lifting one of the supposedly unusable sandbags. As she tried lifting one herself, she realized it had become heavier, meaning Kurt might possess a huge amount of hidden mana, perhaps far more than anyone realized. Meanwhile, Kurt and Yolisha journeyed to the mountains. As evening fell, Yolisha brought him to a campsite where they would stay the night. With only one tent, she invited Kurt to share it with her. Kurt declined, explaining that he felt uncomfortable being around such a cute lady. He even complimented her beauty, making her blush. Yolisha assumed he was just trying to flatter her, but she appreciated the gesture nonetheless. For dinner, she gave him a boiled potato, which Kurt gratefully accepted. It had been a long time since anyone had cooked for him. Unlike his old companions, Yolisha treated him as an equal. He was genuinely touched by her kindness. Later that night, while inside the tent, Kurt struggled to sleep. He turned to see if Yolisha was awake, only to find her sleeping with her robes slightly open. He nearly shouted in surprise, but quickly stepped outside to avoid doing something inappropriate. Unbeknownst to him, Yolisha had been awake the whole time. She had intentionally pretended to sleep without proper clothes to test whether Kurt would try anything. Satisfied with his behavior, she concluded that he was trustworthy and admitted at least to herself that she found him cute. The next morning, Ulisha found Kurt sleeping outside, wrapped in her robe. She noticed that the robe's broken button had been repaired. Amused and touched, she wondered if she had chosen the wrong profession for someone like him, who seemed more like a soft-hearted craftsman than a miner. They set off again, planning to mine enough or to earn 10 gold coins before the week's end. While Ulisha hadn't selected a specific site, Kurt advised against digging at random. Drawing from practical knowledge, he explained how mining didn't work like a video game. Eventually, discovered a quarry and began digging. Within minutes, he uncovered several gemstone crystals, each worth about 3 gold coins. With just these, they had already met their weekly goal, but Ulisha told him to continue digging. A few hours later, Kurt had extracted every single gemstone from the quarry. Ulisha wanted to sell them immediately, but Kurt suggested using the smaller ones to create magic crystals. Although crafting them typically required rare skill and time, only 10 craftsmen in the kingdom could do it. And even then, slowly Kurt managed to create one instantly. Ulisha was stunned. She pointed this out to Kurt, who assumed the craftsman used divine magic he didn't know about. Realizing that Kurt didn't even understand the magnitude of his abilities, Ulisha simply let him continue working. That evening, Ulisha traveled back to the city to sell the materials while Kurt stayed behind to tend to chores. However, at the city gates, she was stopped by knights who demanded documentation for the rare crystals she carried. Unable to explain without exposing Kurt, she revealed an emblem, claiming she served under the royal family, though that was no longer true. The knights let her pass, and Ulisha quickly visited a merchant to trade the crystals. The merchant was astonished, explaining that the crystals had 10 times the usual mana and were worth far more than expected. In the end, Ulisha earned 500 gold coins. Before she left, the shopkeeper advised her not to sell them elsewhere, warning that others might try to scam her. The merchant also asked who had crafted them. In answer, Ulisha chose not to give. The shopkeeper, impressed by the craftsmanship of the magical items Ulisha had brought in, insisted that someone with such talent should be working directly under the kingdom. However, Ulisha refused to reveal Kurt's identity without his consent. The shopkeeper remained persistent, ordering her as a royal court mage to disclose the craftsman's name. Still, she held her ground. As a final offer, the shopkeeper proposed something shocking. They wanted to make Kurt both a director and an honorary count of the kingdom. Completely taken aback, Ulisha rushed to the workstation, slammed her hands on the counter, and demanded answers from the receptionist. She couldn't understand who on earth was this guy. Using her authority, Ulisha accessed Kurt's records. To her disbelief, the system showed that Kurt had received a gear rank in his aptitude test. Despite this, she handed 500 gold coins to the receptionist, instructing that it be deposited into Kurt's account. Before leaving, she strictly forbade the receptionist from revealing any information about him to anyone. Returning to the campsite, Ulisha was stunned to find that Kurt had transformed the entire area into a fully functioning farmhouse all within a single day. She couldn't help but repeat to herself, "Seriously, who the heck is this guy?" Meanwhile, Golnova's party was out in the wilderness for the first time since kicking Kurt out. But things weren't going as expected. Their attacks no longer packed the same punch, and it started to become clear that the so-called useless loser might have been the one carrying the entire team. The healer, Marl, found herself unable to heal anyone due to an unexplained lack of mana. Golnova barked at their newly hired mage to use a fire spell against the attacking tree monster, but the newbie snapped back, insisting that fire magic was Golnova's specialty. As the team descended into arguments, the silent member Bandana stood in the back, smirking with a villainous air, clearly amused by their impending downfall. Back at the campsite, Ulisha told Kurt about Mimiko, the shopkeeper who had used her royal court mage status to recommend Kurt for a director position at the Royal Magic Technology Research Lab. Kurt found the offer difficult to believe and declined it, stating that he couldn't imagine himself in a position above others. A part of him still hoped to reunite with his former adventuring party, the Flaming Dragon Fang. Besides, he was content working under Ulisha. Ulisha, however, didn't reveal just how much gold she'd earned from selling the magic crystals. Instead, she encouraged him to mine more, or Kurt mentioned having found a new vein nearby and was about to leave when Ulisha stopped him, urging him to rest, assuming he had worked all night to build the log house. But when Kurt casually mentioned he'd slept for 6 hours, Ulisha was left speechless. She couldn't comprehend how he had constructed such a large structure in so little time. Naturally, Kurt misunderstood her silence, thinking she was angry at him for sleeping too much. In an effort to make amends, he promised. Kurt led Ulisha to the new mining site. He explained his plan to dig around the area where he had found a large crystal the day before, then left her to work on her own. After a day of mining, Ulisha managed to find a single ore. Overjoyed, she imagined that if Kurt turned it into a magic crystal, it could sell for over 10 gold coins, enough to meet her quota. Yet a part of her felt guilty for depending on him. Perhaps that was why she hadn't touched a single coin from the 500 gold they had earned the previous day. As dusk settled, she went to check on Kurt, expecting chaos. Instead, she found a proper mining site neatly built and fully functional. Stepping inside, she was finally forced to admit that Kurt was operating on cheat codes. Despite her awe, she asked how his day went. Kurt replied that he felt he had underperformed. Having only mined small fragments of the ore he was searching for, he showed her a pile of shiny stones, dismissing them as useless. But Elisha instantly recognized them as mithril ores far more valuable than gold or even platinum. Shocked, she asked if he was out of his mind. Kurt simply said that his village used to dig up plenty of mithril, but since they had no use for it, they threw it away. Elisha couldn't wrap her head around what kind of village would waste such valuable resources. Still stunned, she remembered Kurt once mentioning that he had found something even more precious than mithril, which he also thought was useless. When she asked about it, he replied nonchalantly that he had been mining orichalcum, known as the metal of the gods. Elisha could no longer contain herself and demanded to know how he found these things so easily. Kurt, the gamer mind oddball, explained that statistically, digging 7 kilometers into the earth gave a high chance of finding orichalcum. At this point, Elisha didn't even want to know how he had managed to dig that deep and still return within a day. Holding her head in disbelief, she asked about the massive hole, and he casually told her he had already filled it in, knowing how dangerous it was. Their day ended at the mining site, and after 2 more days of relentless mining, Kurt's 1-week job came to an end. He had built the mine so well that it created a direct path from the city of Samya to the feudal lord's town. Since Elisha apparently owned the mountain, she granted access to the traveling merchant guild to use the path in exchange for a maintenance fee. Although it might seem selfish to use the fee to pay her taxes, it was justified since all earnings from the ores had been deposited into Kurt's account. Upon returning to the city, Kurt ran into Bandana. She told him she was no longer part of the Flaming Dragon Fang. According to her, Golnova had gone mad after suffering consecutive defeats and wanted Kurt back, not as a member, but as a scapegoat. He even threatened to harm Bandana if she didn't comply. Rather than follow orders, Bandana reported him and left the party. However, Bandana didn't share all that with Kurt. She simply said that she, too, had been fired. Disheartened, Kurt expressed his admiration for Golnova and said he had hoped to reunite with his former party. Now, with Bandana gone, that dream seemed impossible. It wasn't clear, but it seemed Bandana might be just as manipulative as the others now trying to exploit Kurt. In no time, she persuaded him to take on her guild commission and sent him to the workshop of an 8-Layer Meister, a master craftsman, in charge of making magical devices, weapons, and medicine. These masters were revered in town. On his way there, Kurt was surprised that such an important figure would live in the city and was even more baffled by the modest home. When he knocked on the door, a young girl answered. He wondered if someone so young could be the master, but she explained she was just an elfand, the assistant named Michelle. Kurt explained he had come to help, and Michelle welcomed him in. To his disappointment, the task wasn't as glamorous as he expected. He was there to do dishes and clean the kitchen. Nonetheless, he accepted it and quickly finished the chores. Looking for Michelle afterward, he wandered to the end of the hallway and knocked on a door. A woman's voice answered, and when he entered, he found a beautiful woman, Princess Slit. Though he didn't recognize her, he found her captivating. He noticed a strange spiral wound on her stomach, which she explained was a curse. With her permission, he examined it and discovered she couldn't feel any pain. Realizing she still had an appetite, he offered to make her food. Back in the kitchen, he was mortified to realize he had seen her in what seemed to be creation robes, making him fall to the ground in shame. Elsewhere, Mimiko and Elisha discussed the rare mithril and orichalcum Kurt had found. They worried about what would happen if word spread kidnapping was a real possibility. Elisha acknowledged that Kurt had been part of the Flaming Dragon Fang and admitted she wanted to set him up as an 8-Layer master to stabilize his life. She also hoped to be hired as his bodyguard, though she wasn't sure how to go about it, since Kurt was still unaware of how powerful he truly was. Meanwhile, Kurt was finishing the meal for Lyslet when Michelle returned with Lady Ophelia. He apologized for using the kitchen without permission, but she wasn't upset. When he mentioned that the food was for a mysterious girl he had met, Lady Ophelia was shocked to hear that he had seen the princess. Though she pretended it was no big deal, she warned him never to speak of it to anyone. After finishing his work, Kurt was thrilled when Elisha handed him his pay for the day. He had earned more than expected, and the sight of the coins left him almost giddy. Later, he brought a bowl of porridge to Princess Lysalot, who was clearly starving. Her stomach had grumbled loudly more than once. Just as she was about to eat, Lady Aaliyah offered to test the food for poison. However, the princess gently refused, stating that she trusted the man who had cooked it. Despite only having met him recently, there was an unmistakable hint of affection in her voice. Lady Aaliyah, reluctant to oppose the princess's wishes, stepped aside. But the moment Lysolot took her first bite, she clutched her throat and collapsed from her chair. Aaliyah panicked, believing the food had been poisoned. Before she could rush out for help, Lysolot suddenly stood up, completely unharmed. It was then that they realized something astonishing. The strange spiral mark on her stomach had vanished. Her curse had been broken. Meanwhile, the ones who had cast the curse became aware that it had been lifted. Fearing their failure would be exposed, they decided to eliminate the princess as soon as possible. Later that evening, Lady Aaliyah and Princess Lysolot visited Mimiko. There, they found Yulisha already speaking with her. Aaliyah hesitated to speak openly in Yulisha's presence, but Mimiko reassured her that Yulisha could be trusted. When Lysolot removed her cloak and revealed herself, both Mimiko and Yulisha immediately knelt. They were shocked to see her, especially since rumors had claimed she was gravely ill. Aaliyah explained that the princess had been cursed by those who had attempted to assassinate her. People opposed to the peace Lysolot represented. Mimiko was baffled at how such a powerful curse could have been broken. Lysolot, smiling brightly, revealed that it was thanks to a man named Kurt. The mention of his name left both Mimiko and Yulisha stunned. Yulisha found it hard to believe that a simple bowl of porridge had the power to undo such potent magic. More than that, she was shocked that Kurt had become so deeply involved in something so dangerous within a single day of being apart from them. Mimiko then shared her suspicions. She believed that only someone capable of bypassing the palace's anti-curse wards could have cast such a spell. Based on her intelligence network, 3 people fit that profile. Sovkats, the first general of the Royal Expeditionary Forces, Tristan Maynov, the bishop of the Poland Church, whose appearance suggested a life of overindulgence, Armama, the third queen of the kingdom. Aaliyah voiced her suspicion of Bishop Tristan, believing he might have manipulated his devout followers into interfering with the wards on Lysolot's room. Lysolot, on the other hand, suspected her stepmother, Queen Isadora, pointing out that she had the freedom to wander the palace unchecked. No one suspected Sovkat's sex. Yulisha, she argued, that while Sovkats had no magical skill, he had deep ties to the Thieves Guild, a group capable of infiltrating and gathering sensitive intel. He could have used them to disable the wards. With no clear culprit, Aaliyah proposed a plan. They would build a fake atelier and appoint a fake atelier meister, publicly announcing that Lysolot would begin her training there. Since she had just turned 50 and considered the age of adulthood in their kingdom, she was expected to leave the palace and undergo a year of training. Their enemies would likely attempt to strike again, but to do so, they would need to investigate. This would force them to reveal themselves while digging for information. The only issue was finding someone who could convincingly play the role of the Meister, someone with no public history, making it hard for enemies to track. Yulisha already had someone in mind, Kurt. She showed them a masterfully crafted magical crystal he had made, stunning everyone. Not only was he suitable, he was clearly overqualified. The following day, Kurt went to Aaliyah's workshop, only to find it closed. Michelle arrived soon after and explained that Aaliyah and the princess had gone out the previous day. She advised Kurt to return the next day. Ever insecure, Kurt assumed he had done something wrong to upset them, unaware that the workshop had closed for an entirely different reason. But, with nowhere to go, Kurt wandered into a restaurant where he overheard a group of adventurers complaining. They had accepted a quest but lacked a porter and couldn't afford to cancel. Eager to help, Kurt offered to join them but warned them he was terrible in combat. Senna, one of the group members, took one look at him and rejected the idea immediately, saying he didn't look fit to carry anything. However, her older brother, Kanza, heavily armored tank, decided to give Kurt a chance. He explained that they were hunting iron golems, creatures weighing over 440 pounds, and they needed someone strong enough to carry the materials. To prove his worth, Kurt effortlessly lifted both Kans and their samurai companion Danzo as if they were nothing. The crowd cheered, and the group accepted him on the spot. As they journeyed toward the golem's lair, Kurt was introduced to the rest of the group. Their kindness surprised him. He wasn't used to being treated with such warmth. Motivated by their acceptance, he vowed to give it his all. When they reached the area, Kurt accidentally stepped on a slime and shrieked in fear. Senna told him to stab its core, but he clumsily stabbed himself instead. Realizing how hopeless he was in combat, Senna finished off the slime. Still, no one scolded or mocked him. They simply grew more protective. This made Kurt reflect on how toxic his previous party must have been. Inside the cave, now resembling a dungeon, Kurt noticed something unusual about the walls. Before he could investigate further, a goblin appeared. Danzo killed it in an instant, but the noise drew a horde toward them. Senna called for a retreat, and Kurt, having discovered a hidden passage, led her through it. Just before the goblins arrived, she closed the door behind them, leaving Danzo and Kans to hold the rear. Despite their decision to stay behind, Kurt was devastated. He begged Senna to let him go back and fight, but Senna reminded him bluntly he couldn't even handle a slime. Hurt and frustrated, he stayed behind, listening as Danzo and Kans expressed their willingness to die protecting their new friend. This moved Kurt deeply. For once, someone considered him a friend worth dying for. As Senna searched for another exit, she activated a spell that revealed 3 massive iron dragon golems in the chamber. She collapsed in terror, thinking this was the end. At the time, Ulisha and Lysolot were frantically searching for Kurt. Lysolot, eager to see the man who had saved her life, tracked his scent along the mountain trail, something that left Ulisha wondering just how close the two had gotten, especially since he had already seen her naked dot back in the cave. Senna, now resigned to her fate, began apologizing for dragging Kurt into danger. But Kurt, surprisingly calm, told her not to worry. Then, without warning, he leaped into action and targeted the golem's tail, downing the first one with ease. Senna, stunned, watched as he finished off the rest, dismissing it as no big deal. He claimed he was used to handling golems from his mining days. Ulisha burst through the wall just as the battle ended, hoping to rescue them only to find Kurt already victorious. Kurt immediately ran to her, begging her to save Danzo and Cans, blaming himself for their situation. Seeing his tears and effort, Ulisha began to suspect he might be the legendary S-rank adventurer from the old stories. Lysolot soon arrived. Lighting up at the sight of Kurt, they reassured him that his comrades were safe. Later, Danzo and Cans thanked Ulisha for her help. She then revealed her true reason for coming. She intended to open a new atelier and wanted Kurt to join. Expecting him to hesitate, she quickly added that Aaliyah had personally recommended him. Though excited, Kurt didn't want to leave his new party. But Cans convinced him not to pass up such a chance. To solve the dilemma, Ulisha invited the rest of them to join the atelier as well. Before they left, she informed Kurt that his skills would need to be officially evaluated. Mimiko conducted the test and was visibly thrilled by the results. Ulisha later asked about the outcome, and Mimiko revealed the truth. While Kurt ranked as a B in cooking, cleaning, and mining and C in other basic categories, the Hidden Hello World test ranked him as SSS in all skills, including magic. In fact, his magic power surpassed that of even the Miko herself. Miko warned that if anyone found out, Kurt's life would be in danger. Fortunately, Kurt remained blissfully unaware of his own strength. Kursel, who overheard the results, quickly covered her ears, pretending she hadn't heard a thing. She knew this was dangerous information. The group departed in a high-speed carriage arranged by Ulisha through her special authority as Atelier Meister. They could have used teleportation, but according to Lysolot, their destination didn't have teleportation stones. The town was a remote frontier settlement, once a military base used to defend against demons across the border. The city still served as the kingdom's primary line of defense. Upon arrival, they found the construction of the new atelier had not yet started. Ulisha explained that it would be built soon, and in the meantime, they'd stay at a local hotel. She didn't want to waste time hiring others, and asked Kurt to build it himself. Though Kurt modestly claimed he couldn't do it quickly, he shocked everyone by saying he'd need only 3 days. Ulisha reassured him that even if it took longer, she wouldn't be upset. He gave her a list of materials, casually including rare items like amethyst, sapphire, and griffin feather. Everyone speechless once again. Ulisha had agreed to procure the materials Kurt needed, choosing to trust him despite not fully understanding why he requested such rare and advanced items for what seemed like a simple structure. Sina, on the other hand, grew increasingly suspicious. She questioned Kurt's motives and couldn't comprehend why someone building a small atelier would need such tools. Though Ulisha noticed Sina's discomfort, she didn't confront her at the time. Instead, she led the rest of the group back to the hotel, leaving Kurt alone to begin construction. After they arrived at the hotel, Ulisha called for a meeting with the group. But before she could speak, Senna cut in. She surprised everyone by revealing that Kurt was the one who had single-handedly defeated the Iron Dragons with ease. Turning to Ulisha, she demanded to know who Kurt truly was and what secrets Ulisha and Lysolot were keeping. Ulisha didn't immediately explain Kurt's background. Instead, she introduced herself properly, stating that she had once served the royal family directly before becoming an adventurer. She then dropped a shocking revelation that Lysolot was none other than the third princess of the kingdom. The announcement left everyone speechless. Lysolot, however, didn't offer an explanation for hiding her identity. She simply asked the group to keep her secret, explaining that her position made secrecy necessary. Nesene speculated that Kurt must also be of royal blood, but Ulisha corrected her. She explained that although Kurt claimed to be from a remote village, she had scoured the kingdom's records and found no trace of his origins. The only thing she had discovered was that Kurt lacked combat ability entirely. Despite that, his non-combat skills were all ranked at SSS, an unprecedented feat. However, the most baffling part was that Kurt himself had no idea, believing it was better for him not to know. They had told him that his abilities were merely B-rank, confessed to the group that she planned to make Kurt the official Atelier Meister, but had deliberately kept it a secret from him. Sina didn't agree with this deception. She argued that Kurt deserved to know the truth. But Yulisha insisted that Kurt wouldn't believe her, even if she told him, and, more importantly, knowledge of his true potential might draw dangerous attention. She stressed that the secrecy was meant to protect him. Cinna grew emotional, accusing Yulisha of exploiting Kurt's innocence. She pleaded with her brother Danzo to support her. Danzo calmed her down and urged her to hear the rest of Yulisha and Lizelot's explanation. Lizelot then shared how Kurt had lifted a deadly curse from her not with combat, but by simply cooking her porridge. She revealed that powerful enemies were still after her, which was why she and Yulisha had chosen this isolated town to set up the atelier. Their goal was to draw out the true enemy while staying hidden. They all agreed that Kurt was far too kind-hearted and would help anyone, without hesitation, so burdening him with the truth would only put him in greater danger. Yulisha asked Danzo, Kantz, and Cinna to help protect Kurt and to keep everything confidential. Danzo and Kantz immediately agreed, already seeing Kurt as a close friend. Cinna, still, had doubts. It had only been a day since she met him, but when Yulisha revealed that she had taken on this responsibility after knowing Kurt for just 6 days, Cinna understood the seriousness of the matter. She stepped outside to think. Returning to the plot, Cinna was stunned to see that Kurt had already dug and prepared the foundation for the atelier. Barely an hour had passed. Kurt, unaware of how impressive this was, modestly remarked that any Berenc like him could do the same. Cinna was floored. No, Berenc could have done this. To make matters more confusing, Kurt claimed that in his hometown, he was actually the slowest among his peers. Feeling guiltier than ever, Cinna asked Kurt if he resented working so hard for others. Kurt, however, smiled and said it made him feel happy and useful. He told her that he was once kicked out of his old adventuring party for being useless, and now that he had people who valued him, he was simply glad to help. Cinna realized in that moment that Kurt really was too pure for the world, and she finally understood Yulisha's desire to shield him from it. Meanwhile, after the meeting, Danzo visited a mysterious woman. At first, there was fear that he might be betraying the group. But it turned out the woman was an informant. Danzo had suspected something was wrong with their previous mission. It didn't make sense for them to have been sent into such a dangerous dungeon. The informant confirmed his suspicions. A man known as Bibino, also called the Man with 1,000 Faces, had manipulated the quest. He made a business out of listing lethal adventures and persuading adventurers to take them. In this case, someone had paid Bibino to wipe out the Sakura group. Danzo paid the informant and went to confront Bibino, who was at a bar trying unsuccessfully to flirt with a woman. When Bibino saw Danzo, he panicked and ran. The informant tripped him with a string, and Danzo caught up. Drawing his sword, he warned Bibino that he no longer considered him a friend and that next time he wouldn't hesitate to strike. Bibino collapsed in fear. As Danzo walked away, the informant, annoyed that Danzo had spared him, signaled 2 men to take Bibino away for unknown reasons. She then received a message from her boss and decided she needed to investigate Kurt's village herself. Back at the atelier site, the group returned and were absolutely shocked by what they saw. In just 3 days, the empty land had become a grand mansion. Every tree and plant bore ripe fruit, something that shouldn't even be possible. Lizelot declared excitedly that it would be her mansion with Kurt, but Yulisha quickly reminded her that it was meant to be an atelier, not her personal home. Inside, Kurt greeted them warmly and apologized for not preparing a welcome. Yulisha sarcastically replied that no one had expected such a miraculous sight. He gave them a tour of the house, including a water supply system powered by a sapphire that guaranteed endless water for a year. Even Yulisha was stunned, having no idea such a thing was even possible. Kurt humbly explained how he set it up. He showed them their rooms, and Lizelot leaped onto a bed made from griffin feathers, claiming it smelled like him. The others teased her. Finally, he brought them to the atelier master's office and asked when the master would arrive. Not wanting to reveal that he was the master, Yulisha lied, saying the position was still vacant. When asked where his room was, Kurt said he'd just used the kitchen to rest, since he was only the cleaner. The group was appalled and begged him for 2 hours to use the master's room in the meantime. He reluctantly agreed, leaving everyone exhausted from the effort. Later that night, Yulisha, remembering Lizelot's curse, asked Kurt if he could set up a protective barrier. Unfortunately, he lacked that type of magic. Fortunately, she had talismans from Mimiko, which she placed around the mansion, especially outside Lizelot's room. When Lizelot noticed someone moving outside her room, she rushed out excitedly, thinking it was her dream man, only to find Yulisha. Both were disappointed in different ways. The next morning, Lizelot dressed seductively and tried to help Kurt in the kitchen, only to be caught by Yulisha, another disappointment. The others awoke to the smell of fresh bread. Kurt had built an oven and made tea and bread for everyone. As they enjoyed the meal, Yulisha realized Kurt was missing. She found him cleaning the talismans she had put up. Even though Mimiko had said they couldn't be removed, he had already wiped almost all of them away. When Kurt asked what they were, Yulisha lied, saying they were scrawls made by vandals. Being as gullible as ever, Kurt believed her. Now, she was left scrambling for a way to protect Lazalat until Mimico returned. Elsewhere, in a distant part of the city, Bishop Tristan expelled Marlise from the Poland church due to her violent failures, including a lightning attack in a restaurant over bad food. Though furious, Tristan gave her one last chance, complete a mission for him, and she could become a priest. He poured her a glass of wine from an enemy empire and asked her to drink. Trusting him, she did, only to learn she had been cursed with the same deadly affliction Lazalat once had. She would starve to death in a month unless Tristan lifted the curse. He demanded that she assassinate Princess Lazalat. Marlise, devastated and betrayed, had no choice but to accept. She was the unconscious figure seen earlier in the magic circle, possibly in service to the demon lord or Tristan himself. Back at the atelier, Ulisha began wondering why the enemy hadn't attacked again. She suspected Kurt's cooking was still suppressing the curse. Kurt, unaware of his own powers, casually mentioned that the mansion now reflected all curses cast within it, though it didn't harm the attacker. Instead, it simply caused them to glow. Coincidentally, at that moment, an assassin attempted to curse Lazalat but ended up glowing brightly. Ulisha went to inform Mimico. While Kurt suggested that Lazalat should take a stroll outside, she declined, not explaining that it wasn't safe. Meanwhile, General R8 and his aide Generic noticed a dark miasma near the town walls and suspected a monster attack. Their fears were confirmed when hordes of undead skeletons approached. But, strangely, the skeletons walked into the city walls and vanished. Mimico soon discovered that Kurt had repaired those sections of the wall, likely imbuing them with some hidden skill. Elsewhere, Marlise was shown to be the one summoning the undead army. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Trust me, you'll want to come back for more. And drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so we can experience the next chapter together. See you soon.